Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking on a genuinely fascinating task, mapping out the ancient biblical texts regarding final judgment and the afterlife. It's a topic that has captivated the human imagination for millennia, but as we're going to see, the original source material might be very different from what you've been led to believe.
Right off the bat, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. Just drop those pop culture assumptions. Put away the pitchforks, forget about Dante's Inferno, and definitely leave behind those cartoon images of a red guy with horns. Today, we're going to look objectively at what the actual ancient source texts say about the afterlife. And trust me, the reality of these texts is far more profound, complex, and mysterious than the caricatures we're all used to.
Think of today's agenda as our itinerary for the underworld. We'll start by mapping the underworld. Then we'll get Sheol and Hades explained, look at Gehenna and final fire, dive into justice and human choice, and finally we'll wrap up by embracing the biblical mystery.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Mapping the Underworld. The very first thing we've got to understand is that the Bible actually refuses to give us a single, detailed doctrine of hell neatly packaged in one place. Instead, it offers a mosaic of concepts. The biblical idea of hell is really a cluster of ancient words mapped over each other. We have Sheol from the Old Testament, which is this shadowy realm of the dead. Then its New Testament counterpart, Hades, depicting a temporary, unseen realm. Next, there's Gehenna, drawn from a literal valley and bringing in that intense imagery of final judgment. And finally, the apocalyptic lake of fire, which represents the second death in Revelation. They overlap, sure, but they aren't strictly identical.
Moving on to Section 2, Sheol and Hades explained. We're taking our linguistic dig into the ancient Shadowlands now, starting in the Old Testament and moving into the New. Let's look at Sheol. In the Old Testament, this is the place of the dead. But get this, it's not a place of fiery torment. Actually, it's this shadowy, hidden realm. The ancient texts describe it as a land of forgetfulness, of silence, and gloom, where human strength just ceases. And here's an absolutely crucial detail. Both the righteous and the wicked go there. The biblical poets often use these vivid spatial metaphors like the depths of the sea or a fortress with gates and bars. It's a hidden underworld, and it's intentionally left ambiguous as to how literal this geography was meant to be understood. Fast forward to the New Testament, and we run into Hades. This is basically the Greek equivalent to Sheol, the unseen realm of the dead. Now you might recognize Hades from a famous story Jesus tells in Luke 16 about a rich man in torment and a poor beggar named Lazarus being comforted. So there is a conscious intermediate state with a real distinction between comfort and anguish. But, and this is key, Hades is a temporary condition. It's just a holding place before final judgment, and according to the texts, it will eventually be destroyed. If we map out the timeline of the soul based strictly on these texts, we get 4 distinct stages. First up, bodily death. Then comes the conscious intermediate state, what the texts sometimes call paradise or Hades, depending on the person standing. Third is the final bodily resurrection, and fourth is the final judgment. So those shadowlands of Sheol and Hades, they literally only occupy step 2. They are not the final destination.
Which brings us to Section 3, Gehenna and final fire. We're stepping out of the intermediate shadowlands and going straight into the intense, visceral imagery of final judgment.
When Jesus talks about final punishment, the main word he uses is Gehenna, and wow, Gehenna has a gritty, terrifying archaeological reality behind it. The word actually derives from the literal Valley of Hinnom, located just outside ancient Jerusalem. Historically, this valley had a very dark past. It was an infamous site of idolatrous child sacrifice, and later on, a place associated with impurity and burning refuse. Because of that horrific history, the valley became this incredibly potent symbol for abomination, judgment, and ultimate destruction.
And notice how Jesus utilizes this historical backdrop. He uses incredibly visceral language to describe judgment. Outer darkness, a fiery furnace, weeping and gnashing of teeth, and eternal fire. But wait a second, have you ever noticed how he mixes completely incompatible metaphors? How can a place be both a fiery furnace and outer darkness? This strongly suggests she's using powerful picture language to convey the absolute horror of being excluded from God, rather than giving us the literal physics of the afterlife.
That brings us to the absolute most final of all biblical terms, the lake of fire. This apocalyptic symbol only shows up in the book of Revelation. It represents the ultimate, irreversible exclusion from God, literally identified as the second death. And in a really fascinating twist, the text says that death and Hades themselves are eventually thrown into this lake of fire, meaning the temporary underworld is destroyed forever by this final judgment.
All right, Section 4, Justice and Human Choice. Why does this judgment even exist? To understand the theology behind these texts, it all comes down to human responsibility and divine justice.
The absolute most crucial point here is that the biblical texts never present final punishment as this arbitrary or capricious thing. God isn't keeping repentant people away against their will. Instead, it's presented as a just recompense for persistent, conscious rejection of God's grace. It completely intertwines human choice with ultimate justice. Hell is really the terminus, the endpoint of a chosen trajectory of resistance to God. Basically, you're given over to the reality you have chosen.
And this perfectly illustrates the biggest myth we need to bust in this entire explainer. Pop culture tells us Satan rules over hell as its king, poking people with a pitchfork, right? No way. The biblical view explicitly states the devil does not run the underworld. Actually, he's cast into the punishment himself. He's not enthroned there, he is judged there under the absolute authority of Christ. God is sovereign over final judgment, not Satan. Finally, Section 5. Embracing the biblical mystery. We've mapped out the text, the timelines, and the theology. But to really respect the source material, we have to confront the profound ambiguities the biblical authors intentionally left unresolved.
To impartially report what the texts do and do not say, we've got to look at those intentional ambiguities. The exact geography of the unseen world, total mystery. The physical versus metaphorical nature of the fire and darkness, undefined. Even the precise nature of eternity is hotly debated among faithful readers. Does it mean endless conscious torment, or does it mean eventual irreversible destruction, what's often called annihilation? The source material uses the language of both unending fire and complete destruction, refusing to just lay out a neat philosophical map to settle the debate. Even the exact mechanics of how we experience the intermediate state remain totally veiled.
But we have to balance that mystery with what the text makes unmistakably clear. The mechanics might be a bit blurry, but the seriousness definitely is not. There is literally no hint in these texts of a second chance after final judgment. There's no post-mortem purgatory for those who reject the truth in this life, and no universal guarantee of salvation. The ancient texts offer a very real, incredibly urgent warning, right alongside the profound hope found at the foot of the cross.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We started this explainer looking for a map of the underworld. But what if the biblical text intentionally refuses to give us a physical, literal blueprint of the afterlife? What if, instead, it's offering us a moral mirror for the present? These ancient texts seem way less interested in satisfying our geographical curiosity, and far more interested in inviting sober reflection, repentance, and a real sense of urgency about how we live our lives right here and right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.